What is the IT strategy for the U.S. Air Force Research Laboratory, AFRL? How is AFRL leveraging emerging technology to transform how it does IT? And what data-driven approaches are being used to improve decision-making across its technical, business, and operational domains? I'll explore these questions and so much more with my very special guest, Alexis Bonnell, Chief Information Officer and Director of the Digital Capabilities Directorate at the U.S. Air Force Research Laboratory. Yeah, I'm wondering about your role, Alexis. What are your specific duties and responsibilities as the Chief Information Officer and the Director of Digital Capabilities Directorate? How do these two dual hats kind of intersect and help the broader mission?
Well, Michael, I appreciate you calling it a dual hat. I wasn't quite sure exactly that I was signing up for two roles, but I'm here and I'm loving it. And I think it's important the way they're interconnected. So I'll give you maybe the formal description of what I do, and then quite frankly, the plain talk version of how I think about my job. So, the formal responsibility is I am responsible to develop and execute the AFRL Information Technology Strategy, which means that I lead the strategic development of highly advanced kind of next-gen technologies and platforms for AFRL. That means my focus really is on catalyzing the discovery, development, and integration of warfighting technologies for air, space, and cyberspace via digital capabilities, IT infrastructure, and of course, technological innovation across the lab's operations and culture. One of the things I say, Michael, is that actually, technology is the practice field of our culture. And so when I come to this job, I really think about what is the type of organization or culture we're empowering. A bit of a plain speak way that I think about when I come to work every day is I really see my role as enabling AFRL and our folks here to ask and answer the question, what if? Faster than the adversary. And what that means is that the goal is really to ensure we can support the right knowledge at the right time, from the right source to the right person for the best decision. And the way that I frame that when I think about coming to work every day, Michael, is I see time as the most critical weapons platform we have. And I really want to help make it our most powerful one, because I think that digital technologies and tools helps us, if you will, wormhole, the OODA loop faster than any other weapon. And so it's really my goal to say, how can we go from kind of observe or orient to the right action with confidence in the right moment?
See, my next question goes into, with such a portfolio and such an effort to execute on that, what are some of the challenges you face? And I typically couch this as a management challenge, as the key management challenges you face, but I'll also include any others that you'd like in the position you're in, and how have you sought to address them?
Yeah, so I think, again, technology is frankly really nothing without people and an understanding of what we're trying to do differently. And so for me, both from a management, but even a technology lens, there's really three main challenges. The first is that challenge for time. We need time to be curious, to discover, but there's so much competition for that time. And so figuring out how do we give people time back. The second, and it really plays into time, is toil. There are so many things, especially I've learned coming back to government, that people have to do before they can even start doing the mission. And I think a big focus for me has been, how do we reduce that toil so that we can have kind of more time, at the microscope, at the lab, for the warfighter. And the third one is really a critical trait, and that is curiosity. So for me, curiosity is not a nice to have anymore. This is a critical key survival trait. It's our job to know what's out there, and it's important that we know, kind of as much about what we don't need to do or invent as what we do need to do. And I think that this is really impacted by kind of three factors, external factors that have shifted over the last 3 years that guide a lot of my thinking. The first is actually the compression of the change horizon, right? So in DoD and in most of government, we used to have kind of a 5 to 15-year change horizon. Michael, that shrank down to about 6 months to 9 months. So just think for a moment, all the time we used to have, and now how quickly we have to change to adapt to that time horizon. The second one, comes down really at a personal level, and that is if you have that type of compressed time horizon, it means that as a leader, you're going to be making 5 times or more this amount of decisions as you were just a few years ago. And so, a lot of leaders and managers really feel that pressure. They can't put their finger on it, but everything seems to be faster, right? Higher stakes. And so really that concept of how do we make better decisions even faster? And the third factor that's critical to this and this curiosity is the fact that 90% of the world's information really came online in the last few years, and that is only going to skyrocket. So if you think about being a CIO, you really have to, I think, approach this role by one of deep empathy, for what it is to actually have to navigate that level of change, make more decisions than ever with more information than ever. And I think, when I approach the role, it's really to understand how do I help other leaders do that with confidence.
I want to switch gears a little bit, Alexis, and get into your strategic IT vision. Could you lay it out for us and perhaps give us a sense of the key priorities you are pursuing?
Sure. I know usually when CIOs answer these questions, you kind of expect to see a bunch of great wonky terms. So I'm going to disappoint you and tell you, again, priorities from maybe a people level. So I think the first one is my IT vision. One of my goals is actually to get people to stop talking about platform or tool, or a particular system, and start talking about the relationship with knowledge they want to have. Because, a lot of times we have so much identity wrapped up in a particular tool or vendor, et cetera, that we're actually missing the point. The point isn't that tool or what it does or what a vendor has or hasn't done. The point at any given time is what is the relationship with knowledge we want to have. I think with that, part of that strategy is recognizing that that relationship with knowledge is going to have to combine human and machine knowledge, in the future, and really understanding how we make space and navigate that. As I mentioned, that comes down to really the goal: right information, right source, right time, right decision maker. Another one is that tools have to be useful at all levels, especially to the information originator. One of the things I notice so much in any large, bureaucracy or government entity is that oftentimes money is spent on information systems in order to improve leader confidence, right? I have the right dashboard, I can report the right story. I really think that that does a big disservice to both the kind of working level, in our case, scientist or researcher, and the leader. Because if you're not building a tool where it's truly helpful to the information originator, the person who first discovers, right, or who first has that piece of data, then quite frankly, it's very unlikely to get to the leader in a timely or effective manner. And so now as we look at our systems and our processes, one of the real things I'm trying to do is to say, is this tool equally useful to the information originator? Because then they are much more likely, right, to put that information in play as it is to further and following decision makers or influencers. And the last thing I would say, is that if technology is going to be the practice field of our organizational culture and values, then we have to be very clear about what those are, and we have to be very dedicated to that, meaning that I can be presented with a great technology, but if it isn't going to ultimately drive the types of behaviors, value, or relationship with knowledge that we want to see ourselves having, it just has to go on the back burner for now.
But you've also described in your many interactions that there are 5 deadly sins of digital transformation. And I was hoping you could identify them. And why is it so important for an organization to adopt, as you've so eloquently said in previous responses, a people-centric mindset?
Well, I know my PA people will freak out if I say any naughty words. So I would just say that in being a well-behaved guest, again, technology is kind of bull poopy, right? If it doesn't make us better as humans, achieve more, right? And so for me, I think we often forget the human side of technology journeys and transformation journeys. So for me, those 5 deadly sins, and I'm sure I'll add one or take one away. So please, check in 6 months from now. But I think the 5 were, the first is not knowing who you're trying to become, right? Because change is going to be constant, that paradigm is changing. Because we're always going to have more information, it's very easy to kind of ping pong, right, between all of those changing factors. And so I think that being clear on your North Star. So for me, that digital transformation, understanding that ultimately, if people can behave more successfully, curiously than they did before, that is my North Star. And in my case, to that end, it is to ensure, national security dominance. That's why I want them to have that. But what that does, Michael, is I think having that clear North Star allows you to have a rubric in which you confront opportunity and challenge. And it makes it much easier to prioritize and to understand the difference between shiny things and like important things. And I think a subset of that is understanding the difference between activity and progress when it comes to really, knowing your North Star. I think the second one is assuming that there's a technological destination. One of the reasons why I love the fact that, the name of my group is Digital Capabilities Directorate and not Digital Transformation is that often transformation insinuates that like there's a moment like you're done, right? Like, I'm done. I hooked up APIs, we're done. Or, I did an AI tool, we're done. And I think the most important thing is to understand there is no destination. This is a journey. And what makes it a journey, and one of the reasons I talk about knowledge instead of data or information is because, Michael, what's powerful to me is that knowledge is a very intimate thing, right? Knowledge is the information and data that we choose to curate that complements our expertise, our experience, right? It's that manifested, part of the information and data. And I think it's really important that that learning journey, that curiosity journey never ends. And therefore, I think you can know how you want to get there and how you want to advance, but thinking that there's a point in time when you're done, I think is not reasonable. The third, and we've mentioned it before, is, really underestimating toil. It is so easy from the top to say, well, just do this and just do that and just add this technology. It is hard, Michael. I think one of the things that I both regret, but also see so much value in is, I am also serving as the authorizing official. And if you think about processes, there is probably nothing more daunting on earth than trying to get an ATO, right? Or trying to go through an RMF process. And, being in this role to not only be having to advance things, but then also having to play that role, right, of gatekeeper and, kind of intentional security minder is critical. But, to me, this underestimation of toil is probably the biggest mistake that I have certainly made, and I think many leaders make. And it takes away the emotive energy that people have really to make a difference, to meet the mission. And so I think it's really powerful, and we cannot underestimate it. I think the fourth one is assuming that doing differently is enough. And we see this time and time again with kind of change management things where, a leader will come in and say, we're going to do this differently now, myself included, right? And, people start doing that and we assume that this is a success and it's going to stick. But, Michael, what I've learned is that because everything is about people, if you don't change how people think and feel, and help them understand why they're doing differently, it's not going to stick. And so particularly when we think about AI, a lot of times when people are educated about AI, that training will jump right into, artificial intelligence is this, or machine learning is this. I think it's really important to step back and say, why? Why now? Why should I care? What does this have to do with me, right? And really stepping back and showing the respect to people to say, let's take you on the journey I need you to go on, of that identity shift so that you actually come out of this thinking differently, feeling about yourself differently than you did before. And the fifth one I would just, reemphasize we've talked about is, the fifth deadly sin is, again, incentivizing the critic versus the doer. If you fill a team with critics, do not be surprised when you have lots of meetings, lots of activity, lots of workshops, lots of things, and no progress, right? Because at some point, Michael, someone has to be willing to be that gladiator in the ring, to take that risk, right? And to do.
I'm wondering if you could tell us more about AI and machine learning, how are you integrating these tools into your research and operations? And perhaps where I'm going with this, Alexis, is the generative AI tool you're using. Could you tell us more about that?
Yeah, sure. So I'm lucky enough, and we are lucky enough, AFRL, to actually be using a lot of different tools. And so we have a group that's, I think, trying pretty much any tool we can get our hand on, because it's important, again, from the Air Force Research Laboratory, some things we need to invent, most things we don't, right? And so sometimes it's just important for someone to come and say, hey, here's my use case. Is AI appropriate to this? And if it is, does it already exist? Is there already a tool? Do I have to create something? And so we see huge importance in being that kind of, ally or bestie that someone can come to and say, like, help me understand this, right? Help me understand my options. So we are absolutely doing a ton with commercial products and just so impressed by the commercial tools out there. And we cannot wait until they kind of, those F-35, so to speak, land on our tarmac and people can start using them robustly. I think for our own learning, though, we really felt it was so important, along with SAF-CN and other incredible leaders, to learn by doing. And I say that, Michael, because, coming from the role of really trying to, contribute to bringing cloud to government, I thought it was really interesting on how much, our relationship in government with cloud was kind of determined by the vendors. And that was because it was new to us, right? And they were walking us through that. And when I looked at that, even coming from a vendor, I really wanted us to be in a different place as far as evidence and experience. And so NIPRGPT is, in fact, a place where we're learning, and we went into it with the intentionality of learning. The intention is not to put a tool out that is going to be better than, ChatGPT. Quite frankly, we're not, we don't have enough money to do anything like that. But what we could do is do a few things with intention. So I think the first thing is that we did recognize there was a lot of anxiety and fear around AI. And Michael, I want to be very clear. There is nothing our adversary wants more than for us to be scared of our own technology. And that was just unacceptable, right? And what we found is that a lot of people, because of that fear, that anxiety, or a perception, for example, that they didn't have the right technical background, or that they, didn't understand the right ethics. What we found is that people were really kind of taking the insights of critics and not putting hands on keyboard, right? Not trying these tools. And it was really, really critical that we wanted to give people the opportunity to try this technology in a safe and secure way. And so bringing that inside, and allowing them to play with it. But we also had, a lot to learn around things like our own evidence and insight of value. So in that learning by doing, we're learning really important things like use cases. What are people actually trying to do and trying to solve? And, Michael, it'll be no surprise to you, but so much of what people are turning to these generative AI tools, including NIPRGPT, is to reduce toil, right? Is to take things that might have taken them 4 hours before and get them done in 4 minutes, right? And to be clear, AI isn't about giving us the answers. It's about helping us curate and have options at speed and scale. So when someone uses an AI tool, they're still accountable for what they do with it, right? What they trust, what they verify, et cetera. But that ability to have more options faster is huge. And we're just seeing incredibly encouraged by the amount of toil that people are able to take away. The second, though, was about, the process of security and ATOing and learning how it is to be able to bring these types of tools to bear. Another really critical insight was around compute requirements. Large scale, large language models or natural language programming tools take a lot more compute. And so for us to understand, well, what does that look like from cloud, from on-prem, and really understand who we were going to be as a consumer. And the final one that I think a lot of people, may not have thought about is there's incredible insights around policy or acquisition here. So as an example, when I see a use case, let's say, Michael, you went to a 4-day workshop and all of a sudden, you were the last person to leave and you got assigned with compiling, the workshop and the output notes. What we can actually do now is when we see that kind of use case, we can actually cost estimate and understand, in different tools, is that a 9-cent task? Is it a 3-cent task? Is it a $2 task, right? And if you think about not only the features, the compute, or those types of insights, it means we'll be in a fundamentally different place to partner with industry, right? We'll be much more informed. We'll be much better partners in being able to say the way we'd prefer to buy AI or the types of features or functionality they're going to be critical, as we look to prioritize those. So, I think all of this, is really kind of, quite frankly, the lessons learned that we've had in NIPRGPT are probably the fastest and most robust in my career. I joke that, I thought I was pretty good at AI, but, in the last 3 months, what the team has had to navigate to make this real is I feel like it's a double PhD, right? And I would say that we are in a completely different place as AI consumers of commercial tech than we were even 3 months ago.
So, Alexis, beyond generative AI, how is the U.S. Air Force exploring the use of digital twins? How can digital twins and digital environments help the military train battlefield artificial intelligence and allow you to be more curious at speed and scale, but proactively?
I'm trying to be careful. I can't say too much because this is definitely getting into some exciting things. But, if folks are familiar with what's in the news, you'll see things that, really this idea of digital twinning, whether that is a supply chain, whether that is a physical, location and the kind of elements of that, whether that is a particular vehicle, fleet, et cetera. I think number one, this is an area where incredible progress has been made by the private sector. Again, when I was at Google, I got to see some amazing work on digital twins across almost all industries, even in the financial industry, right? That ability to kind of, model different types of approaches. And I think that ultimately, if our goal is to ask and answer what if faster than the adversary, then digital twins are critical to that. And I think what's really interesting to me when I look back at some of the work done on COVID vaccines and other types of elements of digital twinning, it's as important to be able to understand at speed what you shouldn't do or what doesn't have potential, right, as it is to find, the perfect cure or the perfect approach. And so I actually think that in my experience with digital twins, there's two factors. One is just, the making of the twin. But the second thing, Michael, which again brings us back to people, is that the twins are only as helpful as our curiosity is, meaning that, a lot of times with AI or with other tools, people will come in and they won't realize that their assumptions, or what they think is valid or not valid is very, very set. And so when you start giving them the ability to be curious, they actually put almost like bumpers, or kind of, those blinders you used to put on horses to keep them looking forward, right? And part of the interesting things I think about digital twinning is actually going to be the type of changes that we have to bring or that we can bring as people to be able to ask new and different and more complex questions, right, than we did before. We used to think about these things as kind of a single line algorithm, if this, then this. And I think now, whether it's generative AI or whether it's digital twins, we can think on a much more complex and rich, sphere and plane. And I think that's going to be the most exciting thing. And in fact, when I do for example, walk leaders through artificial intelligence or whether or not it's a good solution for them, I actually ask them to do, Michael, what I call a 10-10. So the first 10 is what are the questions that this AI tool or digital twin or what have you has to absolutely get right? Meaning if it doesn't get this right, it doesn't have any validity, and if so, easy, don't use it. AI is not the tool for you. And so, for example, you could imagine if you were, setting up something, a digital twin of a plane, that digital twin really has to know exactly how long that plane is, right? It has to have some basic physicalities. Or if you were modeling, creating a RAG AI database for something like a budget, or budgetary questions, it's really got to get the budget number right. Otherwise, it's kind of dead in the water. And the way I think about that first 10 is almost like what would you create a dashboard around, right? If this is the type of thing that you either have reports or you have a dashboard, then that's the first 10. But the second 10, Michael, those are the things that are kind of the wonder list, right? If I could know this more easily, it would save me time, right? Or I would make a decision, or I would, ask a very different question than I could before. And in some cases in AI, let's say of those 10 things, in some cases, it's going to get 2 of them right. And that's still an advantage, right? In some cases, it's going to get 9, 10 of them right. And that's going to be game changing, right, to our decision flow. But what I tell leaders is that it's really important as a leader that you come into that conversation when you think about any technology and you understand that 10-10, right? You have done the work to kind of say, what information is most valid to me and I need to be consistent? And what information is my wonder, my wonder list and how I might apply that? And often what I see is leaders will come and say, throw some AI at this. Like, certainly it would be better, with some AI. And the answer is probably, but you've got to do that intellectual work to kind of say, what would good look like, right? What would great look like? And so I think whether it's, again, generative AI or digital twins, the real opportunity is, while we're building these tools, is for leaders to kind of think in that expansive and curious way, because curiosity is a muscle. And for many of us, it's atrophied, right? And it's really an opportunity to say, what do we want to know that we can't easily know now?
This has been the Business of Government Hour, a conversation with Alexis Bonnell, Chief Information Officer and Director of the Digital Capabilities Directorate at the U.S. Air Force Research Laboratory. Be sure to join us next time for another informative, insightful, and in-depth conversation on improving government leadership and its effectiveness. Until then, subscribe, download, and listen to the entire interview at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Audible, or on your favorite podcast app, and as always at businessofgovernment.org.